Bayard Rustin was born on March 17, 1912, in Westchester, Pennsylvania, into a world that seemed determined to limit him. But Bayard was anything but limited. Raised by his grandparents, he grew up in a Quaker household where the values of peace, equality, and justice were deeply ingrained. It was his grandmother, Julia, who shaped much of his moral compass. She believed in standing up for what was right, no matter the cost, and Bayard took that lesson to heart. As a young man, Rustin's brilliance was undeniable. He attended Wilberforce University, an HBCU, where he developed a sharp intellect and a passion for social justice. But it wasn't just his mind that set him apart. It was his audacity. Bayard was openly gay in a time when that alone could ruin a man's life. And yet, he never let society's prejudices silence him. He chose to live authentically, even when it cost him dearly. In the 1940s, Bayard's activism began to take shape. He joined the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a group dedicated to nonviolent resistance, and quickly became one of the country's most vocal advocates for civil rights. But his work didn't stop at racial justice. Bayard was also an outspoken critic of war, segregation, and economic inequality. Whether it was organizing protests against segregation in public transportation or traveling to India to study Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence, Bayard Rustin was always at the forefront of change. But while Bayard was a man of extraordinary vision, his journey was far from easy. His openness about his sexuality made him a target, not just for the government, which sought to discredit him, but even within the civil rights movement. Leaders who should have stood beside him often distanced themselves, afraid his identity would jeopardize their cause. Can you imagine that? Fighting for justice, only to be told you don't belong in the fight because of who you are. Yet, Bayard didn't give up. Instead, he worked even harder, moving behind the scenes to ensure the movement's success. He became the architect of the 1963 March on Washington, one of the largest and most influential protests in American history. And while Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. may have delivered the famous "I Have a Dream" speech, it was Bayard who made the dream possible. Bayard Rustin's life is a testament to the power of resilience and authenticity. He faced immense challenges, but he never let them define him. Instead, he transformed them into fuel for his activism and a legacy that continues to inspire us today. By 1963, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, but organizing a national demonstration on the scale of the March on Washington was no small task. It required vision, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to justice, and Bayard Rustin was the man for the job. Rustin's organizing skills were legendary. He didn't just think big, he thought meticulously. Every detail of the March on Washington, from transportation logistics to security plans, bore his fingerprints. Imagine coordinating over 250 people, ensuring they had a way to get to Washington, food to eat, and a space to peacefully protest. It was a logistical feat that even today would be considered groundbreaking. March on Washington wasn't just a protest, it was a statement to the world. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. may have delivered his legendary "I Have a Dream" speech that day, but it was Bayard Rustin who made that stage possible. His ability to organize, to inspire, and to galvanize people from all walks of life is a reminder of the power of leadership rooted in love and justice. But here's the truth about Bayard Rustin. His work didn't end on that historic day. After the march, he continued to fight for equality, both within and beyond the civil rights movement. He championed LGBTQ+ rights, advocated for economic justice, and spoke out against apartheid in South Africa. For Rustin, the fight for justice was never just about one cause. It was about creating a world where everyone could thrive. Still, Rustin's contributions remained in the shadows for far too long. Why? Because society wasn't ready to honor a gay black man as a hero. For decades, his name was left out of the history books, his contributions minimized or ignored. But we're here to change that. We're here to reclaim his story and remind the world that Bayard Rustin was, and is, a revolutionary. As Bayard Rustin grew older, he didn't slow down. His activism evolved, but his mission remained the same: to fight for a more just and equitable world. In the 1970s and 80s, Rustin turned his attention to LGBTQ+ rights, an issue that was deeply personal and yet widely overlooked within the broader fight for equality. It was during this time that Rustin met Walter Naegle, a young man who would become the love of his life. The two met in New York City in the late 1970s, and despite their 37-year age difference, they formed a deep, enduring bond. In a time when same-sex couples couldn't legally marry, Rustin and Naegle found another way to protect their relationship. Bayard adopted Walter, legally establishing their connection in the eyes of the law. This act of love wasn't just practical. It was revolutionary. It was a way for Rustin to affirm his identity and his partnership in a world that refused to acknowledge them. And while society may not have fully recognized their union, Rustin's love for Walter was unapologetic, just like everything else about his life. In his later years, Rustin continued to advocate for marginalized communities, traveling around the world to support movements for democracy and human rights. Whether he was fighting against apartheid in South Africa or speaking out for LGBTQ+ equality, Rustin's voice remained as powerful as ever. Bayard Rustin passed away in 1987, but his legacy lives on. Today, he is remembered not only as a leader of the civil rights movement, but also as a trailblazer for LGBTQ+ rights. A man who dared to be himself in a world that often demanded otherwise. And while his contributions were once overlooked, the world is finally catching up. In 2013, President Barack Obama posthumously awarded Rustin the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. It was a recognition that was long overdue. Bayard Rustin's story is one of resilience, brilliance, and authenticity. He reminds us that being unapologetically ourselves is not a weakness. It's a strength. His life challenges us to fight for justice in all its forms, to embrace love without fear, and to never let the world define our worth. So, as we reflect on Rustin's legacy, let's carry his spirit forward. Let's honor his courage by continuing to stand up for what's right, even when it's not easy. And let's remember that the truest way to create change is to live authentically and unapologetically. That's it for this episode of QueerStory. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear Bayard Rustin's story. And don't forget to join the conversation. Follow us on social media and share your thoughts using the hashtag #QueerStoryPodcast.
I'ma do what I want, when I want, how I want. I'm high as a